length. So, for example, this is an odometer. Um, the odometer, this is located in your car, and the odometer is right here. It tells you how many miles that you've driven. This is a Trundle Wheel. This has an odometer on it as well, but instead of driving, you're walking. You push this wheel, and it tells you how many feet you've walked. It's good for measuring like the edges of a building or the edges of some land. It's not good for miles and miles because you have to walk. Like a car would be better for that, but it's not good for like inches or small amounts like that. It's good for measuring around a house or some land. And a yardstick is 3 feet long. It looks like this. It's 36 inches. It's good for measuring things that are within 1 or 2 yards or less. And a ruler is just it's like this, except it's 1 foot instead of 3 feet long. So we talked about these different tools, and then we talked about what units we would use when we measure with these tools. So a ruler, if you want to measure something that is a certain number of inches long, you would probably use a ruler or a yardstick. Okay, so we put inches here. If you're measuring something in feet, or how many feet long something is, you probably would use a ruler or yardstick or a trundle wheel. If you want to measure something that's going to be around 800 feet, trundle wheel would be very good. Something that's a few feet long, 5 feet or less, ruler or yardstick is great. So for measuring yards, we would use a yardstick, obviously, because that's why it's called that. Or we could use a trundle wheel. A yard is just 3 feet. And if we can measure feet, we can measure yards. And a mile, well, miles are something that you would measure in your car. You wouldn't walk 20 miles with a trundle wheel or lay down your yardstick for 20 miles over and over again to measure it. You'd use your odometer. So miles would go here. So if we're asking a question, Mr. Lee wants to find Eric's height. What tool and unit should he use to measure height? Well, we wouldn't use a car. They'd have to lay down, and you'd have to put the tire right where their feet are, and then slowly move forward, and it'd tell you what fraction of a mile that is. That wouldn't be helpful. Trundle wheel might be okay, but then again, they'd have to lie down on the ground, and then you'd have to move, walk along the length of their body to see how many feet it is. A ruler or yardstick is going to be most practical and precise. So let's say yardstick. You'd use a yardstick. And the unit he would use, well, we wouldn't use miles because that's way more than a person, the height of a person. Yards are okay, but we usually don't describe our height in yards. Inches would be okay also, but again, we don't usually describe ourselves in inches. I'm 5'6". I don't say I'm 66 inches. We usually say feet, and then whatever leftover inches. So I would say feet. You would measure it in feet. Okay, so on to the measuring of weight. So this is a cartoon example of a medical scale. We see them at the doctor. They're used to weigh people. And these are spring scales. This one here is a scientific spring scale. In all these cases, you hang something from this hook, or in this case, this basket, and then this tells you how much it weighs. This is a scientific spring scale. You hook something onto here. It tells you how many newtons of force it exerts. This is a scale that looks like something you would use to weigh your luggage, to make sure that it's light enough to get onto the plane. You would hook your luggage onto this and hold this up, and then you can see, well, did I buy too many souvenirs? Do I need to leave some of them here or put them in a different suitcase? This is a type of spring scale. And then this one over here on the right, this is a spring scale that we see at the store all the time. It's just like these, except that they attach a basket to it, and they calibrate it so that this isn't part of the weight. And we weigh our vegetables and fruits in this, and we find out how much they weigh. So Let's start with the weight down here. We once again, spring scale and medical scale. Now we have ounces and pounds. We all pretty much know what a pound is. Everybody usually, in America at least, expresses their weight in pounds. So we don't hook the back of our coat onto a spring scale and have someone lift us up. We step onto a medical scale. So on the other hand, and by the way, the abbreviation for pounds is LBS, or LB for pound. The Spanish speakers will know that the word for pound in Spanish is libras, and that's kind of where that comes from, the Latin root of pounds. So that's how you can remember it. Spring scale, you can also actually use a spring scale to measure things in pounds, things like your luggage, like we said before. You want to make sure it's under 50 pounds. Ounces. Now, would we use a medical scale or a spring scale? Well, medical scales are used to weigh things that weigh as much as people, but spring scales you can use to measure smaller things, like we do at the store when we're weighing our fruits and vegetables. So ounces, and the abbreviation for ounces is OZ. So capacity, so that's weight. Capacity is basically how much liquid or sand or something would fit inside something. It's a type of volume. It's basically volume. We have teaspoon, tablespoons, cups, pints, quarts, and gallons. Well, most people are familiar with these. This big one is a tablespoon, or TB. Let me write the abbreviation, TBSP, tablespoon. And this is a teaspoon. This TSP. There's 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. These are the customary units we use in America and other places. The rest of the world, they use milliliters, but we use this. Now, this is a liquid measuring cup for cooking and baking. Usually these are about 2 cups in size, and they have all these little lines on it, so you can measure smaller amounts too. I wouldn't measure a teaspoon and tablespoon with this, because that's a very small amount in comparison to the size of this. But I would measure cups, that's C, pints, which is this whole thing, because there's 2 cups in a pint, quarts, so you would just, more than one of these would be a quart, but not, I believe that's two of these would make a quart. And gallons, you could measure gallons with this. You could measure gallons, like I believe 8 of these would make a gallon. But this is a milk jug. This is a gallon-sized milk jug. This is exactly a gallon. So this would be something that's measured in gallons. So here are some scales that we use to measure mass. The units of mass are metric: grams, kilograms, and milligrams. Now, a gram is like a potato chip. It's basically, that's how much, that's what it feels like when you hold on to a gram weight. A milligram is 1/100th of that. It's basically, it feels like it's basically the mass of a grain of sand. It's very, very small. Very small. And kilograms, this is about 2.2 to 2.3 pounds. So it's much heavier than these. It's 1,000 grams. Okay, so this is a potato chip, or an envelope with a letter in it. Potato chip, grams. And milligrams are very small, grain of sand. Kilogram, 2.2 to 2.3 pounds. Okay? So some tools that can be used to measure mass are a pan balance and a large scale. Now, we've used these pan balances in class. You put your object on here that you want to weigh, and then you put some weights on here, and you just keep putting it on there until these are balanced, and then you just figure out how much, you count up these weights, and that's how much this weighs. And the word that's called a pan balance because you know that you have to balance these. A large scale, this thing here, is used, for example, in a vet's office. We would put an animal to sit or stand on this, and then we would see how much they weigh on here. Now, we would not put a pet onto a pan balance. That they would not like that. So we would definitely use a large scale to measure the dog's mass. And so what are the units? Is the dog going to be in grams, which is the size of a potato chip? We want to know how many potato chips of this weighs, or milligrams, which are the mass of a grain of sand. Would we want to know exactly how many grains of sand a dog weighs? Those are actually way too small. Kilograms, which is 2.2 to 2.3 pounds, is is what we would use to weigh a dog, to find the mass of a dog. So, and the abbreviation for that is kg. Those are metric units of mass. So, let's talk about metric length. Metric ruler is just like a regular, it's just the same ruler that we use, except you use the metric side. All our rulers have inches on one side, centimeters, millimeters on the other side. A metric ruler is just the same thing that we use normally with inches. We just turn it over and we use the metric side. That's what makes it a metric ruler. Now, meters versus yards. Meters are very close to yards. A meter is very close to a yard. It's a little bit bigger though. It's a little bit bigger, but we can think of it as being just a little bit more than a yard. So a metric ruler, once again, just a regular ruler. We're just using the metric side. Meter stick, a little bit more than a yard. We talked about a Trundle wheel and the odometer, but this time we're using metric units of length: millimeter, centimeter, meter, and kilometer. Well, meter is the size of a meter stick. Once again, a little bit more than a yard. Centimeter is about the width of your pinky. Millimeter is 1/10 of that. It's just a tiny sliver. For example, on here, this is a centimeter, and this is a millimeter. So this would be about the size of your pinky, the width of your pinky, and this is a millimeter. Just a tiny, tiny, tiny part of that, 1/10. Okay, so millimeter is pretty small. So, which tool would we use to measure a millimeter? Well, definitely not an odometer, because that's in your car. Trundle wheel is this big wheel that you're pushing around. We need something very small that has very precise measure, and that would be a metric ruler. So millimeters, mm. Centimeter, same thing. Width of your pinky, cm. We're going to use a metric ruler for that. Meter, well, obviously it's a meter stick. That's why it's called that. It's 1 meter long, a little bit more than a yard. And the abbreviation is m. But we can also use a Trundle wheel to measure meters. The odometer in our car, we use that to measure kilometers. That is 1,000 meters, 1,000 of these meter sticks. It's about 3/5 of a mile. So in other countries, we use miles. In other countries, they use kilometers. You'll see on cars, they usually have miles on the outside, kilometers on the inside. But in other countries, they just use kilometers because they're on the metric system. Now, capacity, in metric units are milliliters and liters. Milliliter is like a little syringe. I went to the pharmacy and I got some syringes. Milliliter. I got some syringes that don't have any needles in them or anything like that, to show off in class and to show what a milliliter is. And a liter is like a big water bottle, a big bottle of soda. Now, we're used to saying 2-liter bottles of soda. Well, half of that would be a liter. I found some liter bottles and I showed them. It looks like a little rolling. It's like a little bit like a bowling pin almost. Anyway, so they use milliliters and liters in the metric system. So this is a medicine spoon, something that you would use to give someone medicine. Now, is that's going to be in milliliters, because that's like a few drops of a milliliter is going to be like a few drops of liquid. So you'd give someone like 20 milliliters or something of medicine. You wouldn't give someone a liter of medicine. That is a lot of medicine. So this is a measuring cup. Same one as before. You turn it around, you'll usually find metric units. Now this can measure milliliters and liters. You can measure, like, in metric recipes, you'll see liquids measured as like 300 milliliters, 500 milliliters of liquid, something like that, and you can measure that in here. You can also measure liters, so you can just, let's see, I believe this would be about half a liter. So you would just, 2 of these would be a liter. And this is a water bottle, and that would be about a liter in size. So these are tools that we use to measure these amounts. Now here's an exercise. It's very similar to what's on the homework. They give us some items, and we're supposed to pick a tool that we would use to measure it and the units we would use when we measure it. So the length of a pencil. Well, since this is length, I'm just going to look at tools that measure length. Metric ruler, medicine spoon does not measure length, it measures capacity. Measuring cup is capacity. Pan balance is mass. Meter stick is length. Odometer measures length. Trundle wheel measures length. Okay, well, a trundle wheel is going to measure many feet of distance. That's too big for a pencil. Odometer, it's going to measure miles. That's way too big. Meter stick, that's pretty huge. That's pretty big for a pencil, much bigger than a pencil. Metric ruler is going to be just about right. So I'm going to say metric ruler. And then, well, what units would I use? Well, let's see. What are the units of length? Millimeter, meter, kilometer. Gram is mass, kilogram is mass, liter and milliliter are capacity. So it's either millimeter, meter, or kilometer. Well, a meter is the size of a meter stick, which is a little bit more than a yard. And that's way bigger than a pencil, so that's not it. Kilometer, well, that's like 3/5 of a mile. That's way too long for a pencil. So I would say millimeters for this one. MM is the abbreviation. Okay, our next thing is a mass of a strawberry. Now we want to find the mass of something, so I'm just going to highlight things that measure mass. Metric ruler is length. Medicine spoon is capacity. Measuring cup is capacity. Pan balance measures mass. Meter stick is length. Odometer is length. Trundle wheel is length. Well, I guess there's only one option, pan balance. And that makes sense. I could put a strawberry on one side and then just very small weights on the other to find the mass of a strawberry. And then, so let's see what units of mass we have here. Millimeter, meter, kilometer are all length. Gram, kilogram are mass. Liter and milliliter capacity. Now a kilogram, remember, that's like almost 2.5 pounds. No strawberry is going to weigh that much. So I'm going to measure it in grams, which is about the mass of a potato chip. That's going to match the strawberry pretty well. So G is the abbreviation for grams. So let's take a look at capacity of a medicine bottle. So I'm thinking like cough syrup, for example. So first of all, we need to just look at tools that are used for capacity. Metric ruler is length. Medicine spoon is capacity. Measuring cup is capacity. Pan balance is mass. Meter stick is length. Odometer is length. Trundle wheel is length. So it's either medicine spoon or measuring cup. Well, if I'm having cough syrup, I just want a spoonful. I don't want a cup of cough syrup. That would probably poison me. So I would say medicine spoon. Okay, so what are my units of capacity? Well, millimeter is length, meter is length, kilometer is length, gram is mass, kilogram is mass, liters are capacity, milliliters are capacity. Well, once again, a liter of cough syrup would be too much. That would be, once again, you'd probably poison yourself if you had that much cough syrup. So milliliters, which are just like a few drops, is probably the unit I would use in a medicine spoon, a certain number of milliliters. So milliliters. And so basically what we want to get out of this assignment is just to get a sense of how big these units are and what tools we would use to measure certain types of measurements and sizes of those measurements. We want this to be intuitive and to make sense.